Hello and welcome to episode 88 of the Sportsballers podcast. I'm Corey Puffett, joined as always by Eric Meyer and Evan Ash. Last week we had our 2020 NFL Draft special podcast where we covered the entire first round in 4.5 hours. 4.5 straight hours of podcasting. It was a lot of fun, and we are back this week for our normal podcast, recording Wednesday evening, and we'll talk a little bit of NFL later on. But first, we'd like to thank all of you who did join us for any length of time last week during that special episode. We know that it was a marathon, and we actually had a few people who stuck with us for most, if not the whole thing. Which was fantastic. If you would like to take a look at that, the video of it is up on YouTube. We did a live show. It was a live stream on Facebook Live for those 4.5 hours, and the recording is on YouTube. You can also listen to the audio of it on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. In the corner, we got a new layout for the video from last week, and on there is our Twitter handle, our Facebook URL, and you can also find us, the Sportsballers, on YouTube. But let's go ahead and get into today's show. We will get to a little bit of NFL stuff later on, but we're going to start with some NBA. And I'm going to start right off the bat with a question that is primarily directed to Eric, but Evan may have some thoughts as well, because this has to do with the 10-part documentary on Michael Jordan that's been airing on ESPN, The Last Dance. I have not yet started watching it. I'm hoping that circumstances allow me to start next week. But for right now, I'm waiting to start that documentary. I know that the two of you have been keeping up with it, though. And this week, and in fact today, one of the top stories on ESPN.com had to do with Isaiah Thomas and his snub from the 1992 Olympic Dream Team, and how he blames Michael Jordan for it. In the article that I read today, the Bulls' former general manager, who was in charge of putting together that dream team, said that when he talked to Michael Jordan about it, Jordan was not in at first. Like they had to have a conversation, and by the end, Jordan was like, "You know what? I'll play." But Isaiah Thomas's name, at least according to this general manager, never came up over the course of that conversation. So how much merit is there to Thomas's snub being Jordan's fault? And do we consider this to be a snub? I'm not sure which of you put this on the list, but snub is in quotes, so maybe one of you doesn't really feel like this was a snub.
That would be Eric putting it in quotes. That's classic Eric Snark with the quotation snub in there. I just feel like this is just Isaiah Thomas trying to insert himself into relevance. This Jordan documentary is a big deal. And Isaiah's like, oh, well, I was snubbed only because of Michael Jordan, and not, because of the way he treated people, or, his play on the basketball court perhaps wasn't as good as the guys they actually picked to be on the team. Stuff like that.
The sole blame on Michael Jordan seems a little bit out of place, because we know that Mike and Isaiah had a long-standing beef that went back beyond just this handshake snub that came up in the documentary, where the Bulls swept the Pistons in the 1991 Eastern Conference Finals, and before the game was even over, the Pistons were already walking off the court while I think Scottie Pippen was shooting free throws. It might have been somebody else, but they were bailing before the game was finished, and so there was some back and forth about whether that was a big deal or not. And the Pistons still, Isaiah Thomas basically tried to say, had I realized the fallout would be as severe as it was, that I might have done things differently. Meanwhile, Bill Laimbeer was going on TV just being like, "I'm glad we did it. Screw those guys, crybabies," So, but
hey, own your action. If you feel like that was okay, then stand by it.
Yeah,
you shouldn't change that action because you didn't get something that you wanted.
Yeah, but Bill Laimbeer has kind of exposed himself as a huge bitter partisan in this situation with zero ability to be objective. He basically came out and he said, I haven't watched basketball in 20 years, but LeBron's better than Michael Jordan. I'm like, well, if you haven't watched basketball in 20 years, you've never watched LeBron James play professional basketball.
Or high school basketball.
Yeah, really. So that was a little bit of a crazy take, but yeah, Jordan and Isaiah's beef goes back to even before this handshake thing. 2 All-Star games in a row, Isaiah led the Eastern Conference All-Stars to snub and freeze Michael Jordan out of the game because Mike was getting a little too much love, I guess, from the media because he's Air Jordan and all that stuff. But you know, I found this out recently too. Isaiah Thomas wasn't a very well liked person in the NBA as a whole. It wasn't just a Chicago Bulls thing. It wasn't a Scottie and MJ thing. It persisted with the Celtics. Larry Bird didn't like him. Robert Parrish didn't like him. Kevin McHale didn't like him. I'm sure Red Auerbach didn't like him. And then also the Los Angeles Lakers, who they played 3 times in a row not 3 times, but twice in the NBA Finals. Magic Johnson contracted HIV and was forced to sit out for 4 or 5 years of playing NBA basketball, but did play on the Dream Team in 1992. And Isaiah Thomas took the opportunity to slight Magic by, spreading rumors about his sexuality due to the fact that he contracted HIV, which, I would say personally is a significantly bigger offense than any handshake snub or any shenanigans regarding the All-Star game. So, there clearly was an issue there with more than just Isaiah Thomas and Michael Jordan. Plus, I did put that in quotes, about him being snubbed on account of, in 1991, Isaiah Thomas wasn't the same player anymore. I mean, he made 5 straight All-NBA teams between, I think, 83 and 87. But then he never made another All-NBA team, first, second, or third. And they select 6 guards for those teams. So he wasn't considered one of the 6 best guards in the NBA for a running 4 seasons leading up to the selection of the Dream Team. So
and how many guards did they put on the Dream Team?
They had 4 guards and 1 guard forward. So
4.5 basically.
Yeah, 4.5. And you look at
that's less than 6 the last time I took math.
Right.
I don't think they've updated
Corey
that
doesn't
since
teach
then.
math, so we got to check that.
Yeah, and if you look at it, both from a statistical lens that we have in 2020, which is obviously a vastly different picture than people would have had in the early 90s, those numbers show John Stockton was better, Clyde Drexler was better, and obviously Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson were better, and Chris Mullin was better too as the wing in that situation. And of course, if you incorporate all the big men, Charles Barkley, David Robinson, Karl Malone, and on and on and on, those guys were also, as far as value goes, better than Isaiah Thomas was. And so the only one that wasn't really fitting that profile was Christian Laettner, who, was the lone college student on the team, or the college player entering the NBA soon enough. And we know that they typically keep at least 1 college star on these teams. And even if they didn't and decided to remove Christian Laettner for a superior player, he likely would have been replaced by a big man, probably Shaquille O'Neal, who probably is the guy that got snubbed based off of current ability the most. Now, that doesn't mean that Isaiah Thomas shouldn't have felt like, he could have been included just based off of his legacy. I mean, he's a veteran. He's a 2-time champion. He's a legend, whereas John Stockton was just turning into a star. He was on the upswing, but he didn't establish himself as that legendary guy yet. And so perhaps you want to include legends on your team that is the so-called Dream Team. And it makes sense for him to maybe have that expectation to be included. And clearly he was left off because of political reasons. I'm not going to suggest that, he wasn't, that he didn't belong or anything like that, or that the people said, we just like Stockton better as a player. No, it was clearly about the things that he had pulled, but he did pull those things. It's not like he had no culpability there. This wasn't just some phantom beef he had with one guy. This was a league-wide issue, traversing the entire continental USA with how many people hated this guy. So, to sit there and ultimately come back to, oh, it was Mike's fault, or it was the Bulls' fault, or maybe even Scotty's fault, it doesn't compute given the way that he treated everybody and the way that people felt about Isaiah Thomas at the time. And as far as I'm concerned, based off of the reaction of Michael Jordan in this documentary, they still feel that way today.
I mean, there's there's no woe is me when it's self-inflicted. So
yes, indeedy. And again, just to be clear, these players were selected for all NBA teams over Isaiah Thomas at the time. So we're not talking about the perspective of me in 2020, 30 years removed. This is how people that followed the NBA in that era felt about Isaiah Thomas as a player during this time period. So it could have easily been argued that he didn't belong. He wasn't some top 5 player that was horrendously snubbed, and you're looking at a guy who was out of place compared to early 90s Isaiah Thomas.
Fair enough. We'll move on to another story that I saw today. This is about 5-star guard, point guard Daishen Nix, who is signing with the G League Pathway program after decommitting from UCLA on Tuesday. And, we've talked a little bit about the G League and the Pathway program on the podcast before, and all three of us, I think, are in agreement that we really like this program as an opportunity for some of these kids, especially the guys who are definitely going to be one and done, and who aren't going to really put a lot of focus in their academics right now. If they're not going to put the focus on academics, then why bother, be there in college when there's another alternative for you to get ready for the NBA, and you can actually make some money right now. So we're all in favor of this program, but back in October 2018, then G League president Malcolm Turner said that the league would not pursue players who were already committed to colleges. And in this case, there had to have been some sort of pursuit from the G League, or at least somebody there saying, hey, we think you'd be a good fit here, while he was committed to UCLA. So I'm interested to get your guys' thoughts on that situation.
Well, I mean, I feel like the one and done rule sort of wastes everybody's time. Like, if you go to college, you can't reasonably expect to graduate in 1 year. So, like, but who goes to college for a year? Like, you're obviously there just to play basketball for the 1 year. You're not there to go to classes and get good grades and stuff.
In most cases, at least.
In most cases. So, like, if your goal is to go to the NBA, it seemed like the sensible option is for you to play professional basketball rather than play amateur basketball in college for this student athlete charade that the NCAA has been putting on for 120 years or however long they've been around. So, how much was UCLA going to pay this kid? I think I can count on 0 hands how much they were paying him.
Maybe you could.
Tuition, but yes, like
that's not money.
But the point is taken. Yes, I know. Yeah. We've discussed this before.
Yeah.
That's not money.
Yeah. So this offers a lot of opportunities for both sides of the coin here, both in the college game and in the NBA. For one thing, the player also benefits, which is the most important thing. The player has an opportunity. Not only do they get paid, which is kind of a crux of the issue, the fact that they're sitting there and they're going out there and they're busting their ass for their college teams and earning no wealth for themselves. They basically get coupons to college classes. Like, thanks, that's wonderful. But by the way, they're useless unless I stay for 4 years and get a degree. Okay, awesome. So, but this also provides the players an opportunity to actually go back to school, because the program provides scholarships for these players to return to college if they desire to.
I didn't know that.
So that's a big factor in it as well. So it's not just like you can't say that you're compromising your future to chase a dream, because for one thing, the dream is likely to come true if these teams are interested in having you in the G League. And for another thing, even if you fall short, they're giving you the opportunity to go get a degree so that you can, enter the workforce or be successful in some other way other than being a professional athlete. It also is a benefit because when you're a professional basketball player, well, that's your profession. Duh. So you're able to spend your entire working day focused on becoming a better basketball player. Whereas when you're in college, you commit so much time to extra things that you never would even consider doing if you were a pro, that it can enhance your game. It can make you more happy. It relieves stress. And oh, by the way, you're making money. And it also helps the college program because it gives us an avenue to move away from the one and done, which disrupts continuity, and it inclines certain coaches to chase the shiny object, to go after the best player in the pool of talent that's available. And that results in players coming in. Some of them are underdeveloped. They're talented and they'll likely be successful at the next level, but they're not ready for that jump, and they spend basically a half a year growing up. I mean, that happens all the time. And then, okay, you might actually get a seasoned, really good player for that year, but then they bounce. And so the continuity is completely disrupted, and you have to restart the system. So it helps college teams, it helps professional teams, and most importantly, it helps the players. So naturally, I'm sure the NCAA will fight it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, the NCAA, you can't do anything that helps the athletes. Why? I mean, why would you do that? You got to have the presidents and ADs and whoever's in charge of the NCAA making millions of dollars, while the kids who do all the work get paid nothing. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like it would be better for college basketball if a kid graduates from high school and he wants to be a basketball player, he can go to college, but he has to stay for at least 3 years, or he can go pro to the G League or the NBA. Like, the playing college basketball for 1 year, like Eric said, it disrupts the continuity. So like if there was an NCAA tournament this year, there would be no story to it. Like there was no, well, last year so-and-so did this to this team, and now they're meeting again in the Final Four. Like all the guys are all different a lot of the time. Like I remember back in 2000, I've never been, just crushed. So I was a Maryland fan, and Maryland figured out how to lose to Duke in the Final Four, and fifth grade me was just devastated. So the next year, when Maryland made it to the Final Four, Duke, they got upset by somebody earlier, and that was so exciting. And most of the guys from that 2000 team came back and stuff. So we don't have that anymore.
Yeah, and so the only people that might actually not benefit from this are the people that have been getting fat off of the work of these kids. The NCAA, bigwigs and all that stuff, because ratings might take a hit without a Zion Williamson being in the field, or a John Wall, or a Kevin Durant. These one and done players, as much as college proponents and apologists love to say, well, these kids don't actually deserve to get paid because they don't actually add value on account of the fact that people will watch anyway.
They don't add value.
Right. It's absurd.
Jim Nantz was calling every single one of Zion Williamson's games.
They had a Zion scam on CBS, but you're going to tell me that Zion doesn't add value. I don't watch college basketball outside of Maryland, but for some very fleeting circumstances. And those fleeting circumstances almost entirely revolve around, is there a really awesome player that is playing in this game? And that was the case with Zion Williamson. I watched Duke play North Carolina, and I never watched that game because Zion Williamson was on the court, and he blew out of his shoe in the first 20 seconds, and that was it for me watching the game. Millions of TVs turned off or changed the channel the moment that Zion was clearly not coming back in the basketball game. So don't tell me that if you run out there with a bunch of kids that can't play or aren't pro prospects, that there won't be at least a significant drop in interest. Yes, Maryland fans are always going to tune into Maryland basketball games and Duke and Kansas and all that stuff. But in order to draw a national audience, you need players that are interesting. And if your players are interesting because they're talented, which is pretty much the only reason you can be interesting as a college kid, then people are going to watch. If not, then you're going to get, you might get regional support, but your national support is going to deteriorate.
Yeah, I can tell you, my college basketball watching it declined significantly right around the time that the one and done rule really kind of came into effect, and it became something that players took advantage of. It just became less interesting to me because I didn't get a chance to really see the good players develop over the course of their college career. So,
And then, like, you also lose, like, Kyrie Irving went to Duke, for example. He played, what, 10 games while he was there?
Mhm.
Like, you don't associate him with Duke University. He basically was a, straight out of high school guy, because we never saw him in college.
Well, some people consider him, a Duke University guy, but those guys are
those are
the
Duke.
ultimate
Those are Duke
haters.
people, though.
Yeah, well, and Duke haters. People.
And I'm not wearing a Duke sweatshirt right now.
Yeah. So you won't get berated by drunken college students. That's good to know.
I
But
don't know.
yeah, but that's
Or
also a
sober
good point.
college
It's like,
students.
yeah, but like if I threw out some one and done names, I would be willing to bet that you guys would struggle to identify where they went to school.
Yeah, a lot of them probably.
Do you know where Kevin Durant went to school?
He went to Texas,
Yeah, Evan got that one. But do you know where Ben Simmons went to school?
LSU.
Let's see, Evan knows all these things.
I
Corey's
thought
looking
that
like,
Ben Simmons. No.
Exactly. Do you know where Carmelo Anthony went to school?
He was
Syracuse.
straight into the. He didn't play college.
No, he was only in there for 1 year.
Oh.
He went to
Oh,
Syracuse.
Syracuse.
Yeah, he won a
They
national.
just retired his number or something up there.
I mean, they should. He led them to a national championship. But the point is that, the college ranks definitely could use some continuity. But at the same time, don't deny that stars help people tune in.
So
Probably, yeah.
wasn't there another player who came in straight out of high school at the same time as LeBron? Because I thought that was Carmelo, but I guess not.
No, Carmelo went to school. Dwayne Wade went to college for a year or two. They were all in the same draft class, but no, LeBron was I think he was the only one that came out of high school in that draft class.
Okay.
There might have been somebody else, but
I
he was
don't know why I
obviously
thought that
the
Carmelo and LeBron both were straight out of high school. Okay.
Carmelo went to school
But yeah,
for 1 year.
now that I think about it, I do remember Carmelo playing that 1 year at Syracuse.
Well, so since Evan undercut my point by
Well, I
knowing,
mean, I only remember. Yeah, sorry about that, but just I remember Ben Simmons when he was in college because it was such a big deal. Why is this guy even here? He's just wasting everybody's time. He's obviously only going to be here 1 year. He's obviously going right to the NBA. Wasn't he from Australia anyway?
I thought he came straight from Australia.
No, he did a pit stop in Louisiana to play for a terrible LSU team. They didn't even make the tournament.
Yeah, they didn't make the tournament.
It was sad to watch.
What's the point of this?
There was no talent on the floor with him, and he can't shoot, so there wasn't really a whole lot going on there. But you could tell that he was gifted enough to be an NBA All-Star for sure, and that's what he is.
Moving on, but kind of staying in the same subject area. There's some news today as well about the NCAA, and we've been talking for a few months now about pay to play and players being able to get endorsements and profit off of their names, image, and likeness. It's kind of started with California passing a law that allowed school players to do that and prohibited schools from punishing players who profited off of their names, images, and likeness. And the NCAA is, I guess their top governing body is finally supporting a proposal that could allow college athletes to sign endorsement contracts and receive payment for other work as long as the school that they're at is not involved in those payments. But there's still a lot of litigation. They got to talk about ways to make sure that that no boosters are taking advantage of this as an opportunity to pay players for their performance or to try and get them to go to their schools, which is something that I'm not sure that I necessarily support. I don't know about having boosters trying to recruit for the schools necessarily, but definitely endorsement deals should be something they're allowed to do. However, the rules that the NCAA governing body is discussing still lag behind those of California and those of several other states who have kind of followed California's lead. and they lag behind those that are being proposed by some United States representatives, including former NFL wide receiver Anthony Gonzalez, along with some other representatives in Congress. So I just want to talk a little bit about that because this kind of fits in with the Deshaun Nix situation and what college players should be getting as far as payment while they're at the college level if they play college ball instead of turning basically semi-pro.
I mean, for me, I feel like the NCAA rules were written on stone tablets, and they're being dragged kicking and screaming into the 20th century. Only realize this is the 21st century. That's just how far behind they are on stuff. But I feel like if you're there's some schools that have really wealthy alumni. So say you're whatever school and you're an alumnus of that school and you own a car dealership or something. Feel like you would reach out to a kid in high school like, hey, if you come to the school that I went to, I'm going to have you endorse my car dealership. Is that okay? I get the sense that the NCAA would hate that. But how do you guys feel about that type of situation? Because that's what it would become.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that's being discussed is that the NCAA they would like for the federal government to basically provide a one law that would apply to all schools rather than it being piecemeal state by state, or because if the NCAA has laws that that are not up to par with the state, right, and the state says that the schools can't punish a school for that the schools can't punish an athlete for taking in more than X number of dollars, then that gives schools in that state an advantage as far as getting kids to go to those schools because their potential profit is higher. And so the NCAA is asking for that, as well as for the government to establish an antitrust exemption to cover the NCAA from future lawsuits that would challenge any potential caps. And one thing that a lot of these representatives in Congress have said is that they really are not in favor of establishing any sort of antitrust laws for the NCAA because of what you just said, Evan, the fact that the NCAA has been dragged kicking and screaming this whole way.
I mean, and I feel like all the fat cats in charge of making all the money, they can take a little haircut. It's fine. They'll feed their families, for sure.
Yeah, did you guys hear Roger Goodell actually took a pay cut down to $0?
Yeah, good for him.
Coronavirus. So
something thought was interesting about Roger Goodell on Friday night. He was getting progressively more tired and more comfortable.
Yeah, he moved from the table over to the chair.
Yeah, I think he was wearing a dress shirt or something, and then, he's got a jacket, and then after that he gets a sweater, and then after that he's just got a t-shirt on, and then after that he's sitting in this big recliner, and then after that he's slouched down in the recliner, a dad on a sitcom or something. There was people on Twitter talking about next you're going to see him in some pajamas and a steaming mug of hot cocoa. Clearly, once you start slinking down in your chair, and he was making a bunch of mistakes and stuff, reading the names.
I didn't watch a whole lot of Fridays. I watched just about all of Saturday's coverage, but I missed a good bit of Fridays.
The next step, he's going to be just reading the pics from his bed.
Goodell needs what he needed what the NBA does is when David Stern used to do the NBA draft, he would do the announcements for the first round, and then he'd hit the Jets and go out and do whatever he wanted and made Adam Silver do the second round, and that was only 2 rounds and 60 picks. Goodell's having to do 245 picks or something like that.
No, because Goodell was only on the screen at the very beginning on Saturday, never saw him again.
Yeah, they just like
there.
they flashed it on the bottom, and then that was it. Like that's how we found out who each team took.
They didn't feel inclined to do the ceremonial, have the commish announce the draft pick. But I guess a segue to that is, we give the NFL a hard time. We give every sports league, professional or amateur or whatever, hard times all the time about how they screw things up or how they're corrupt or can't get out of their own way. You got to give the NFL a serious round of applause for how well they pulled off the draft.
Oh yeah, that was fantastic.
That was like, it was not just adequate given the circumstances. A lot of people felt it was better than the typical draft. Some of they pulled off with a level of sincerity that I didn't think the NFL was capable of. Like they handled the whole situation, realizing that this was a product of something terrible. The pandemic that has destroyed this country over the past 2 months, and it was done with that understanding that this is serious. And
now, to be fair, ESPN did not handle it the best with some of their graphics and some of the things that they brought up about players' families' history. Like I forget the player who, like, they pointed out his mom's former drug addiction. It's like, really? What? Like, how is that? How does that have anything to do with him as a player? And why is that any of our business? What kind of demons his mother has fought in the past? Like, I mean, maybe they're thinking, celebrate the fact that she's gotten over that addiction, if that's the case. Which, I mean, that's great, but that's her business. That's not for ESPN to put out there and air that kind of laundry.
Yeah, see, the problem with that is, like, and this is the path to hell being paved with good intentions, I think, where it was a situation where it's like we're trying to celebrate this young man and his family overcoming something terrible like drug addiction, but at the same time, this is like the type of stuff that, like, you watch movies and people and African Americans complain about this a lot. But if you watch like movies that deal with racism from the 60s and earlier than that, and it's not real. It's watered down. It's serious enough to make you say, wow, that sucks, but it was just good enough and just of a happy enough ending in such a terrible situation to make white people comfortable with it. And this is the type of thing where it's like, where white people can look at it and say, oh, that's nice, instead of just respecting the dignity of the people that they're talking about. Because, like, everybody's like, oh, that's a great, pull yourself from your bootstrap story that, white people just eat up. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's also a person. And that's also that person's mother, who is also a person herself. So show a little respect for those boundaries and, talk about the player himself. He talk about what he likes, what he does. You don't have to talk about how he's overcome this story that we've heard a million times, because you notice there are plenty of white players that probably have had family issues and overcome serious problems. You don't see that in their cards because that doesn't appeal the same way. It doesn't hit for middle America the same way to go, this is what this was about. And it's a little nauseating at times because it's like you're trying to do too much without actually solving any problems.
Yeah. Before we move on and talk a little bit more about the draft, which, like Eric said, I mean, definitely the NFL did a fantastic job with it. I do want to talk, there's a little bit of baseball news, and, I have not gotten a chance to read Trey Mancini's article in the Players Tribune yet. I'm usually the one who brings up stuff in the Players Tribune, so I was pleasantly surprised to see that somebody else put that in the notes for today. So I am very interested to hear what he had to say, because Trey Mancini has been diagnosed with, I believe, stage 3 colon cancer. Is that right?
Yes,
that's correct.
Which is really sad. I mean, he had surgery before the season, and we weren't sure how long it was going to keep him out. But then, more recently, we found out about his cancer diagnosis. So, did the article in the Players Tribune reference that at all, or was it about a completely different topic?
I mean, it sort of had the whole story in there. Like, it sort of described how he found out he had cancer because he was taking his spring training physical and he wasn't feeling quite right, and they did some blood tests, and they're like, well, let's just do a colonoscopy, and that's how they found the tumor. But he's 27 years old. You usually start getting a regular colonoscopy when you're like 40. So,
Yeah, I'm 28. I have not thought about getting a colonoscopy yet.
Well, I've
It's
thought
not on
about
my
it
to-do list.
Since I heard about this. I'm like, wait, he's younger than me. Let me just get that checked out. But then he also talked about his recovery process, how he's got like 5 more months of chemotherapy treatments. But he says he's going to try to stay in some sort of baseball playing shape. But then he also said that if baseball does resume in 2020, it's probably not going to have him in it. So hopefully he's back. Hopefully he's back healthy just in his life in general. But then also hopefully he's back for the Orioles in 2021. So
yeah, I mean, I can't imagine him staying in baseball shape during treatment for cancer, especially when it's stage 3 cancer. But I mean, like that really doesn't matter at all. He's been in baseball shape, which means that he's healthy other than this, which gives him a much better chance to fight this, and hopefully he does fight it successfully.
Yeah,
And that's the most important thing beyond being in baseball shape or ever playing baseball again. Just like recover, get healthy, and hopefully he can do that. Also in baseball news today, the Hall of Fame announced that they unanimously canceled the 2020 induction ceremony that was scheduled, I believe, for July, and instead the 2020 inductees will join the 2021 Hall of Fame class in a ceremony next July, July 25th, 2021. So coronavirus just keeps, knocking things back and postponing things. But the important thing is that we are doing our part to try and flatten the curve and lower the number of deaths. I mean, that's really what flattening the curve is all about. Anybody who tries to say that flattening the curve and eliminating deaths is not the same thing,
it's not the same thing.
They are the same
it's
thing.
The same thing.
Flattening the curve is all about, making this, yes, may last a little bit longer overall, but you're not going to overwhelm our healthcare system as much, which is going to mean that more people who get it can be seen and get treatment and recover and not die. So
also, like if the hospital is overwhelmed with coronavirus patients and you have some other ailment that you need to go to the hospital, you can't get treated either.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, there are plenty of people who are dying right now, not directly because of the coronavirus, who are still dying because of the coronavirus. We can't necessarily measure that number. You can't say, oh, this person definitely died because they couldn't get treatment because we were overwhelmed by coronavirus patients. But you know that exists. Like, that is absolutely a thing. You can't deny that.
Yeah, there's a clear causality there. I mean, and you can take a ballpark look at it and say, okay, we've already done this a little bit where you look at the numbers of deaths related to coronavirus, and then you look at the number of deaths not related to coronavirus, and that second number is a lot higher than it used to be. That rate has increased because, for one thing, that could be undiagnosed coronavirus deaths, and that could also be people that are unable to get treated, like we mentioned, or just straight up afraid to go to the hospital because they don't want to go in to get checked out because they don't want to be surrounded by a bunch of people with coronavirus. So there's all kinds of factors there that incentivize limiting the amount of people that are being treated for this, and it has a huge butterfly effect if you can alter that.
Yep. So sports leagues are doing everything that they can to do this. Back to the NFL draft. We talked about how this, in some ways, was an even better experience than in past years. Obviously the NFL draft is a bit of a spectacle in late April, and it's always a lot of fun for the people who follow it closely. I know Evan always tunes in every year. I tune in at least for the first round pretty much every year. But like I watched more of the NFL draft as a whole this year than I have in past years. It was cool to be able to see these players and their families in their homes, and not just the big name players, who obviously usually are at the draft, not even like the next tier players who aren't invited to the draft, but we still usually see them because they're projected to be day 2 players. But we were seeing players in the 6th and 7th rounds. We were seeing look-ins into their homes. I mean, that was a great job by the NFL to and ESPN to organize that and make sure that we could have access to that and get those players, have their face on the screen and their reactions and their parents and their loved ones. That was really cool to see. And I was really happy afterwards when Roger Goodell said that there are definitely aspects of the virtual draft that we want to keep in the future. It was cool to see coaches with their families. Oftentimes these coaches are locked in a war room for days leading up to and through the draft. And here they got a chance to actually have their kids be a part of the experience. We got to see Matt LaFleur's son look at the camera like, it wasn't me.
We also got to see Mike Vrabel's son taking a dump on camera. So, you take the good with the bad.
That was debunked. It was just somebody sitting on a couch.
You know what? But I'll take that because that filled in a bingo space for us.
Yes, it did. And I pointed it out on the show.
Yes, you did.
I'm like, wait, is somebody sitting on a toilet? What?
There was all kinds of things going on. The Vrabel
somebody had a mullet.
Right, they had Frozone.
Like, Frozone
why?
costume.
He was wearing a Frozone suit.
What in the world? Yes. And then there's just Vrabel just sitting there. He's not dressed in a costume or doing anything awkward or weird.
There was I think it was on day 3. He had a guy walk out of a bedroom, putting his shirt back on, and a girl walking out right behind him.
Yes.
That was pretty suggestive.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely something that shouldn't have been seen on camera. Check it off the bingo card.
Right.
Yeah. We also had Bill Belichick's dog.
That was great.
You had a mom pulling a girlfriend off of her son.
Yes.
That CD Lamb matching his phone bag.
It was. I want this every year. I want some of that every year. We can have the top guys be invited to the draft and walk up on stage, and that's great. But I want the virtual stuff too. I don't want just one or the other.
I do feel though that the festival of the NFL draft in that city is an essential part of it as well.
Yeah, and that's why I say I wouldn't want it to be one or the other if we have the opportunity to have the in-person experience as well. But I want the virtual setting in addition. Yeah,
they had hundreds of thousands of people standing outside in the pouring rain in Nashville last year. So, when I went to a draft in Chicago and it was freezing cold and windy and stuff, but it was fun though. They had, kids doing combine activities. You could run the 40-yard dash, through some grass, which was just mud. You could kick some field goals and throw passes and stuff. It was a whole thing. It wasn't just everybody stand in this spot and read the names. They had the whole festival, and the whole city was decorated.
Yeah, no, I mean you definitely want some of both, but if there is a silver lining to everything with the coronavirus, it's that we've all learned ways that we can do. At least a lot of us can do our jobs and do other fun activities in a virtual setting. It doesn't replace being in person. And certainly it would have been nice if we could have found this out without a global pandemic. But this software that we're using to record the video for our podcast right now and that we did our live stream through last week, we never would have looked into that. We might have been delayed in bringing video to our podcast for a lot longer. I've found stuff that I can do to make me a better teacher using a virtual setting, and I can't wait to be able to use it in conjunction with what I do in person in the classroom. So like I said, wish it had come without the pandemic, but if there is a silver lining, that's got to be it. We're finding a lot of ways to use technology in more creative ways than we've ever thought to use them in the past.
We've got to be sure to apply these lessons that we're learning so we don't end up in this situation again.
Yeah. So moving on to just kind of our thoughts about the NFL draft for our teams in particular, and then any picks or other team grades that we'd like to discuss. I guess we can start with Evan, with your Ravens.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How do you feel about the draft? Are you giving them an A++?
Well, I mean, my biased self gives them an A++, but then when I, looking at the picks and stuff, I give them just an A+. So,
I mean,
they absolutely crushed it again. So
it's crazy. Like, as an unbiased person, they get an A+ from me. I mean, this isn't right, man. Like, I gotta sit here and root for the Redskins. And 30 miles north of where I live, there's a team whose city's baseball team I root for that is just killing it every year in the draft. They're knocking it out. They get rid of their soon-to-be Hall of Fame general manager, who is also a Hall of Fame tight end. They replace him with some guy who shares my name, and he's just as good. Like, what is going on here? Like, it's just.
Eric DeCosta's been there for 20 years, learning right next to Ozzie.
It's unbelievable. The Ravens deserve it though, man. That's good front office stuff, man. To have that good of a draft after having great drafts the previous few years, after like pretty much their entire history in Baltimore has been them crushing it in the draft. I mean, they haven't had, outside of maybe Rashad Perryman and a handful of receiver picks completely dud. Overall there's a reason why they've been in the mix for pretty much their entire existence. And it's because they consistently rebuild their team or retool their team to stay good or to get good again on the rare times they have a lull.
Yeah, I mean, this was a team that went 14-2, right? We picked a lot of good players, and we weren't picking at the top like the Bengals and the Redskins were. So, and when you go 14-2, your team probably doesn't have a whole lot of holes. It's not a whole lot of glaring issues. Well, this team sucks at this position and this position and this position. You just have to kind of, patch up the little holes rather than rebuild the whole house. So, so there's some guys I really like on here. I was, Hugh Jackson and I were socially distanced watching some tape this evening. And so, I was impressed with everybody, but let's see. Like, we drafted Patrick Queen in the first round. From what I saw from him, he's always where he's supposed to be. There's a lot of comparisons between him and Kenneth Murray, and Kenneth Murray was more explosive in terms of the things he did, but he was oftentimes in the wrong hole and then would use his speed to get in the right place. Never saw Queen doing that, so he's a little less flashy but more solid. And to be honest, the Ravens, in that playoff game, it exposed that the linebackers needed some help big time. So the other linebacker we got was Malik Harrison out of Ohio State in the third round. And they sort of used him all over. But one thing I noticed watching the Ohio State players is Ohio State, they didn't play any actual teams hardly. There's a lot of highlights against Florida Atlantic and Cincinnati and Rutgers and Maryland and Indiana. Oh my goodness. Can we get to the Wisconsin and Penn State and Clemson portion of the schedule, please? Right? So I sort of kept that in mind as well. And then I guess I want to mention J.K. Dobbins right quick, also out of Ohio State running back. Steelers fans are really upset about this pick, and that's how you know you did something right as a Ravens fan. If the Steelers fans are upset, that's usually a good thing. So he runs with power and speed, and he's quick too. He's a good receiver. He has good hands. Just an all-around great back. and to add to that running back core, it's just it just makes the whole team even stronger. You're always going to have fresher running backs that'll be more effective down the stretch. It showed that when Mark Ingram got hurt last year, that was a big deal. So to sort of need him a little less, I think that's a good thing.
I guess moving on to the Redskins and our picks. Yeah.
Is Chase Young any good?
Chase Young's, he's all right. He's all right. Yeah. I'm not too upset with that pick. Number 2 overall, probably the top player in the draft. Great edge rusher from Ohio State, and he actually did have highlights against all of the teams.
Including Maryland, yeah.
Including Maryland.
I tell you, I saw so many, just all day on day 1.
I saw all day on day 3.
Had at least one highlight of somebody owning Maryland, and I'm just like, damn it, what am I gonna do?
All day on day 3, I was seeing highlights of players against Maryland.
Well, the problem is our uniforms are so flashy that you can't miss them when they're on TV, getting thrown into the dirt, and just getting pushed away. They look great as they're getting flattened.
I mean, you can see those Maryland uniforms from outer space. They're quite something. I kind of felt the same way because there's so many UGA players getting drafted, and of course they show the Georgia Tech highlights. Like, well, that doesn't count, right? Our program is hopefully this is rock bottom. Yeah. Same with the Clemson guys. Lots of Georgia Tech highlights. Not that we haven't beaten them in 6 years, but who's counting?
So, as a whole, though, I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this draft class for the Redskins. I'm glad they went out and got a couple of wide receivers in Antonio Gibson and Antonio Gandy-Golden. Antonio Gandy-Golden is apparently a genius. Like, he's really smart. He can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute. Like, that kind of smart. Like, I wish I could solve a Rubik's Cube at all.
The Rubik's Cube, though, it's a mechanism. It's not like I could solve a Rubik's Cube. It's not that hard. I don't know if I could do it in a minute, but I know
I've never solved a Rubik's Cube. I've solved multiple sides of a Rubik's Cube, but I've never solved an entire one.
There's a clear
algorithm that you can practice.
Yeah, and it's like I could solve a Rubik's Cube in probably 5 minutes, but not a minute. That requires insane levels of twitch too. That's more than being
regardless.
Smart.
Apparently, he's a really smart dude.
When I was in college, because I went to college at the capital of Nerd Nation, at Georgia Tech. Like it was so nerdy, and I loved it. But like people would bring their Rubik's cubes and compete against each other to solve them, and then like they would take the cubes apart and like grease the inside so you could turn it faster.
Oh my God!
And stuff like that. Yeah. These are actual things that happened. Aside, once people start playing Magic the Gathering and get their Rubik's cubes out, oh my goodness! First time I've ever felt not nerdy enough. It was great.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see how good Sadiq Charles is. He's the offensive tackle the Redskins took out of LSU. He's a starting tackle on with the Tigers. And they took him just after trading Trent Williams to San Francisco. So, they were able to get a little bit of something from the 49ers in exchange for Trent Williams early day 3. And they took an offensive tackle right after. So we'll see how good he ends up being. But, one of the Redskins' top needs was defensive back. And while they did take a couple of safeties late, with Kalike Hudson out of Michigan in round 5, and then Cameron Curl out of Arkansas in round 7. It's hard to find good secondary players that late in the draft. Like I feel
drafted Geno Stone in the 7th round. He's just going to be a special teams guy.
Yeah, you don't typically find a lot of starting cornerbacks and safeties in round 7 of the draft, or even round 6 or round 5. Like most of those guys, most of the starting caliber players at those positions are gone by the 3rd and 4th rounds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, perhaps the Redskins, if They could have traded back, right? Chase Young would help any team, not just them. So,
we're not giving up Chase Young. It can't happen.
Well, I mean, just this is like what I was saying. You have so many holes, you can't fill all of them at the same time.
Right, but I want to guarantee that I plug at least one. Whereas if I trade back, I could just have the same 2 holes next year because I did a crappy job drafting them. Getting a key can't miss prospect is a huge thing because it's like I know I'm good with my top pass rusher for the next 4 years at least. So, I got no complaints with them making that decision.
And the Redskins picked up the 5th-year option on Jonathan Allen after the draft, which is big.
What is that?
He's like our other end. In fact, he's technically our right end. Like
defensive end?
Yeah. Like he's technically our right end, which Chase Young is coming into play. So like one of them will probably move to left end. Or maybe Jonathan Allen moves in to be our second D tackle now that we're moving back to a 4-3 this year.
What happened to Kerrigan?
He's a linebacker.
Yeah, Kerrigan is an outside linebacker.
Oh.
Okay. Like he sort of plays the edge as well, but like from that linebacker position in a 3-4 setting.
Yeah.
Like he's probably going to play like a true outside linebacker role in the 4-3 this year.
Really?
That'd be my guess. That's not to say that he won't rush the passer at all from that position, but he's not necessarily going to be lining up on the line of scrimmage as a linebacker.
Well, he's too small to play, on the line. Like he's got to be. He can't play the end.
When I say that, like when he's played in the past, like he'll play on the line, but he's not really playing as a defensive end. He's playing outside the tackle.
Right. Yeah, because he's an extra rusher.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like he may occasionally come up and sort of be in that position, but for the most part, he's going to be playing as a linebacker this year, not as a edge rusher.
Yeah, that's been most of his career.
Yeah. So, overall, I'm okay with the draft, but it's going to be kind of a wait and see because, like, I don't know about the back end of this draft for the Redskins. I love the Chase Young pick, obviously. I mean, that alone, means that the Redskins should not get any lower than a B.
They got the best player in the draft,
right? So like, you can't give them lower than a B/B+. But the other picks, I don't know. I'm glad that we got a couple of wide receivers. I don't know how good these wide receivers are, though. And if they're not good, then it doesn't really do us any good.
Hugh Jackson's available.
Gotta grind some tape. Yeah, the issue, though, when, like we mentioned it, when you're as bad as the Redskins are right now, you draft these guys and you don't really have an idea of, how good they are. But it's going to be hard to figure that out when they're joining a pretty crappy football program. And it's like you don't really have a way for the pieces to fit if your entire thing is falling apart before they even get there. I mean, there's no infrastructure here. And we have to get an idea of what this football team looks like and whether or not they can actually build something before we can actually talk about, okay, how good are these incoming players going to be? Because, we still have to find out if our quarterback can play. That's the biggest thing is we don't know if Dwayne Haskins is the guy yet. We hope he is. We have some reasons to be optimistic. We have some reasons not to be optimistic. It's a wait-and-see situation. Whereas, like with Baltimore, they know what they have, and they're just working. They're making some tweaks, and they did everything right to make those tweaks and then some. Whereas the Redskins are kind of like, yeah, we got these talented guys that might be good, but we might also find out that they're good somewhere else because we couldn't make them good here because we're just too far behind the 8 ball.
Yep. Do want to give the Pittsburgh Steelers a little credit on a nice draft pick on day 3, taking Anthony McFarland Jr. from University of Maryland and from DeMatha Catholic High School. We talked at the beginning of last Thursday's show. I had interviewed Anthony along with some other former DeMatha players who were eligible to be drafted this past weekend. And, Anthony's a good kid. There had been an article that was published about where an unnamed scout in the NFL or unnamed GM had said that he had a terrible attitude, childish character. I didn't get any of that during the interview. I don't think the Steelers have to worry about this being an Antonio Brown 2.0 sort of situation. I don't see Anthony being that kind of guy, and I'm really happy to see him land with a really good organization like the Steelers. Obviously, as far as their on the field product, it hasn't been up to snuff lately, but I have a lot of respect for their ownership and their front office up in Pittsburgh.
Steelers had a lot of injuries last year.
Yeah.
They were everybody was hurt on that team.
Yeah. So I think he's going to be. I think he could be a pretty productive player out of the backfield behind James Conner this year.
They have a good offensive line.
Yeah. So we'll see how he does. Hopefully he does well. Also want to
not too well.
Well, yeah. Also want to give some props to the Saints on a couple of moves that came after the draft. They signed Jameis Winston to their 1-year deal worth $1.1 million with up to $3.4 million in incentives, but that's not really what I want to congratulate them on.
Boy, right there.
They also
boy.
They also signed Maryland cornerback and former DeMatha Catholic High School player Tino Ellis as an undrafted free agent. Tino was the first guy that I recorded an interview with last week or a couple weeks ago, and he gave a great interview. I really enjoyed talking to him, and I'm really excited to see him get his shot at the NFL level. Haven't seen anything for DeAndre Kelly or Deontay Holden yet. I'm hoping that they might get signed, but usually undrafted free agent signings happen pretty quickly after the draft. So, but we'll see if maybe they get a camp invite later in the summer, if and when camps actually take place. So, but definitely want to congratulate those DeMatha guys for that. Was there any pick in the draft as bad or as weird as Jordan Love to the Green Bay Packers?
No,
not quite as weird, but I did find it strange that the Philadelphia Eagles used a second-round pick to draft Jalen Hurts. It's kind of in the same mold where it's like you used a day 2 pick on a quarterback when you've got a 27-year-old quarterback that you've just paid a bunch of money to. It seems like a little bit of having your cake and eating it too. It's just not good football. Now, the difference between the Eagles and the Packers is
the Eagles have a quarterback who can't stay healthy. So
that's true. That's true. But the other big difference is outside of that pick, the Eagles had a really nice draft filling their needs. They took a bunch of wide receivers when they desperately needed help there. They took some good defensive players to help bolster that defense that was falling apart at the seams last year. Whereas the Packers,
they didn't do anything.
They drafted a quarterback in the first round. I think they drafted a running back.
Yeah, they drafted a running back in the second round to replace the best player on their offense last year, Aaron Jones.
Or if Evan was paying it, Evan would say it was Jamal Williams because he.
Aaron Jones, complete bum. You don't want him.
Yeah,
gotta go.
You can drop him from your fantasy team.
My goodness.
But that's the other thing.
Sandwich.
It's not even like they just have Aaron Jones. They also have Jamal Williams. They've got 2 running backs who are both good.
Yeah, and Aaron Jones is really good. So I don't get that pick at all. And it's so stupid because it's like you just put a big fat expiration date on Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. Like you just straight up said this dude won't finish his career here unless he's willing to hang it up in 3 years. Which, by all indications, Rodgers has said, I want to play into my 40s. Well, he's 36. So I'm not a math major, but I'm pretty sure that 40 plus minus 36 is more than 3. So he's going to be going somewhere else. And, Brett Favre said something today about how basically this ensured that Rodgers won't finish his career in Green Bay. It's like, yeah, they drafted his replacement. They traded up into the first round to draft his replacement, who we don't even know if he's any good.
Right. Like this isn't even one of the top quarterbacks in the class. And it's funny because like I saw the quote from Brett Favre and like my initial reaction was like, why is he even saying this? Is he really that salty? And then I remember Jordan Love. I was like, oh yeah, somebody probably asked him about that because like it's kind of a similar situation where but it's even different from that because Aaron Rodgers was really good. Aaron Rodgers could have been the first overall draft pick that year. Mm-hmm. Like he a lot of people were surprised that he wasn't taken instead of Alex Smith by the 49ers. Nobody is sitting here surprised that Jordan Love wasn't drafted over Burrow or Tua. Like that's not a thing.
Yeah, and plus there's also some other considerations where I mentioned that Rodgers wants to keep playing.
Yeah, Favre, we had no idea. Like Favre could have retired after that next season, and then that was around the time that Favre watch started.
Yeah, Brett Favre mulled retirement that offseason. He committed to coming back in March, 6 weeks before the draft. So the Packers are like, the quarterback might not be here anymore. And oh, by the way, a super talented player inexplicably fell all the way to 24. We have to take him.
Right.
And they did. Like, it wasn't like in this situation, Jordan Love can't realistically get on the field for 3 seasons because Aaron Rodgers just got paid. And the Packers have no real way to get out from under what they owe him. If they try to trade him, the dead cap hit they're going to take is going to be enormous all the way through 2022. So
it's going to be $50 million against their cap if they trade him.
Yeah, so that's not an option.
Yeah, no, that's not an option until at least the 3rd year of this deal.
Right. 3 years from now.
This kind of reminds me a little bit, honestly, of the Orioles in 2014. Where they went and they had a really great season. They made it to the ALCS, and Dan Duquette, the GM at the time, just said, our team's good enough. We don't need to actually get better because we made this far." Even though everybody could tell, okay, this team got this far, but it was kind of a perfect storm season. I mean, Steve Pierce led the team in WAR, so that probably wasn't going to happen again. And Dan Duquette was like,
pitchers.
And so Dan Duquette was like, "Yeah, we'll let Nelson Cruz walk. We'll let this guy walk because Machado's going to come back, and we're going to get Chris Davis back, and we're going to get Matt Wieters back, and that'll make up for the difference of what we lost." Not saying, "Oh, that'll improve our team and get us over the hump." No, we're good enough because we made the ALCS in a perfect storm year. Well, what happened next year? They went 81-81, missed the playoffs, and they haven't gotten out of the hole since. Yes. You need to constantly be trying to improve your team, and you need to understand that just because you went 13-3. And made the NFC Championship game, we said all year the Packers were frauds. Like, we knew they weren't that good, and we knew that they were going to get their ass kicked by the 49ers when they walked into Santa Clara for that playoff game. We were like, okay, they got no shot here because they didn't have a shot the first time, and nothing changed the second time.
Right. Well, going back to the Orioles, because I can't resist, Dan Duquette should have been fired that offseason. That was general management malpractice. He needs to go to prison for getting rid of Nick Markakis and bringing in Travis Snyder, who is still fat and slow and can't hit the ball. I don't know what you saw in Travis Snyder, but ain't none of that show up in Baltimore.
And Nick Markakis is still playing good ball.
Nick Markakis is still playing good ball. He's about to get to 3,000 hits. There's Hall of Fame whispers from the bushes, but I don't know. But there's, it's like, this is unbelievable. So. And then they try to make it up. Oh, we're going to sign Mark Trumbo instead because we let Nelson Cruz leave. Nelson Cruz is still mashing dingers, and Trumbo is somewhere else, not eating pies, I guess.
But anyway, so back to the Packers.
Yeah. One thing that I saw in the Jordan documentary is about being in win now mode and going for it all and stuff. Like the Packers, sort of basically have Michael Jordan. Like, you have one of the best players in the league on your team. You need to maximize your window of opportunity of winning a championship by helping him do better.
Yeah, get him some weapons, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, this was a historically great wide receiver draft class. They didn't get any of them.
Did I see something? Am I remembering correctly? I saw something earlier this week that said that Aaron Rodgers has 1 career touchdown pass to a first-round draft pick.
That is correct. It's Mercedes Lewis.
Mercedes Lewis.
Yeah. Now again, that's not to say that the Packers have always left the cupboard barren for Aaron. Rhymes.
They intentionally did it this year.
Yeah, but they always had a nice stock of second-round picks that they used. Randall Cobb was a second-round pick who hit. Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings. I think Richard Rodgers even was a third-round pick. James Jones was a third. So they used a lot of day 2 picks to get pretty good receivers that Aaron had. But those guys are gone. Like, Jordy Nelson is retired. Randall Cobb is playing somewhere else and isn't as good anyway. So really all you've got left is Devontae Adams, who was a second-round pick. And then you got a bunch of other guys. Like, you need to get them at least one other guy. And they didn't invest either their first or second round pick into a player of that skill set when there were so many to choose from. It didn't make any sense at all.
They got Marquez Valdez-Scantling.
Your boy.
What about Equinemius St. Brown? Is he still there?
Equinemius St. Brown. How do they have all of the crazy names on their team? All right. The last thing on our list, and I really don't want to spend too much time on it just because Eric, Evan, and I talked about this quite a bit earlier in the week, but I want to bring it up. It's on our list, and if any of you get to this point in our podcast and feel so inclined, we would love to hear your guys' opinions. You can tweet at us at Sportsballers18 and help us think about this question, which is, can an all-star team of college football players beat an NFL team? I brought this up the other day basically saying I think that an all-star college team could beat the worst team in the NFL. I'm not necessarily saying that they would win every single time they played, but I think that they could win. And I hear what Eric is saying as far as the difference in the game, but I brought up the fact that back in the day, up through Super Bowl 10, they had a college all-star team that would play against the NBA or the NFL champion, whoever won the Super Bowl or the NFL championship. And while the NFL champion obviously won most of the time, the college team did win 9 times, and they tied a few other times. So, and again, I understand it's completely different. I would never in my life try to suggest that an all-star college team today could compete with the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, no way, no how. That would be absolutely ludicrous for somebody to suggest that. But the Bengals, I'm telling you, I can see it.
I take your point about the college all-star thing that they used to do, but I looked it up, and while, yes, they did win sometimes, like, if you look at the timeline, the trend was they were winning a lot less as time went on. Because
they never won against the Super Bowl champion. Like, those last 10 years, technically 9 seasons they did it because there was 1 year they took off. Like, they didn't win any of those games.
Right, and, but it also seemed that the trend in general was, it was a little more front-loaded. It wasn't like an even spread of those 9 wins. And, I understand that, college football has improved too, but just the level of, infrastructure that goes into the NFL nowadays, the money invested, the, all the training, because it's become such a lucrative career option for even the least successful NFL players. It's that hard to get onto an NFL roster that it requires extraordinary talent and hard work. And, in order to stay on that roster, you still have to maintain some semblance of ability. You can't just coast.
Yeah, and I get that. And I also get that, like, at the college level, it's not like that, obviously, but we're talking about the best college players. Like, we're talking, like you look at, I think LSU led all programs with 15 draft picks.
Yep.
You know how many of those would be on this all-star team we're theorizing? Maybe 2. Maybe 2.
2.
Probably, because there's that many other colleges.
Uh-huh.
We're picking the best, the 53 best college players across the whole country, across the entire NCAA. I'm not seeing much more than 2 players from any one program. I mean, I could, like, maybe an occasional third player, but, like, we saw 2 Alabama wide receivers taken the first round. It's unlikely that both of them are on this all-star team.
But they were the 2 top receivers taken, so who else would be there?
There could be some other guys who just were not valued by those NFL teams the same way, but they were still better as far as how they played this season.
Yeah, but see, I think that's a different conversation. I think that requires us to look at, who had good rookie years versus not. We're talking about, putting together just a roster of teams based on what we know now. But what we know now doesn't affect what we know tomorrow. The best player in this draft could have come out of the 6th round. There's no way in hell that we would have put that kid on an all-star team right now. So that's where I get.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not trying to say that player should be on that all-star team because we wouldn't have voted them on. But I'm also
Yeah,
not trying to necessarily go just off of where players were drafted, because just because these two Alabama players were valued as the top two wide receivers by the teams who drafted them, who happened to be at those particular places, if a different team who was going to draft a wide receiver had drafted before that second team took the second Alabama player, they might have taken somebody else. But I'm talking like right after the NCAA season, right after the college football season, you have a vote on who those players are. I think that team stands a chance to beat the Bengals.
But one thing I think that you're missing, though, is there's more than just athleticism and being big and strong and fast to being a professional football player. Like, when you're in the pros, you know the game mentally as well.
Okay, but we're talking the top college players. These guys know the game mentally. Maybe not the NFL game. Maybe not all the schemes that NFL defenses run. And so, yes, they'll be more prone to mistakes. But I think the game is competitive, and I think that the college team can win that matchup.
No, because it's just it's the subtleties and the little details. Like Steve Smith would talk about how, he's not a big guy or anything, but, the way he generates separation from the defensive back, you're not going to have practiced and honed that skill if you're just coming in from college.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm coming from, too. It's not just about, like we understand that the best college athletes coming into the NFL are probably going to be really good in the NFL. At least some of them are. But the thing is, they haven't practiced against pros yet. And while I understand in your hypothetically, you're going to give them a few weeks to get acclimated.
Weeks.
The thing is, you look at even these college guys, they spend at least 75% of their games just smoking fools that they are so much more athletic than, because they're playing, Troy or Louisiana Lafayette or some school like that.
Whatever cupcake Ohio State's playing that week.
Or Maryland or Rutgers or some crappy team that is so outgunned. That's the big thing for me is you look at the best college team. I know we're talking about an all-star team here, not the best college team, but you look at the spreads of those games and how much they crush their opponents, and then you take the hypothetical of worst team versus best college team, and the spread would probably be 40. Well, the difference between the best team and the worst team in the NFL is a lot smaller than that. So how much would the spread be for the champion, the Chiefs or the Ravens or somebody really good versus this college all-star team? What would the spread be on that? It would be really high, at least 30 points. It would be 30 points, guaranteed. They would be favored by at least 4 touchdowns. And
that sounds a bit high. I could see 21.
But if the Bengals played the Chiefs straight up in a game, the spread would not be that high. It would be maybe 18 points.
I mean, once you get up to 18, are we really going to argue how big a difference 18 to 21 or even I guess 18 to 30? Yes, it's big.
30. Yeah, that's a big difference.
But I really don't know that it's 30. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, but
it's 130.
Going back to what Evan said, these guys haven't trained at the NFL. They're not grown ass men yet. They're still developing. That's the big thing. Is after a year or two in an NFL locker room with some experience, with some full time effort into weight training and becoming the best athlete you can be, then hell yeah, the all-star team that you grab could definitely compete and beat an NFL team. But as just straight out of college rookies, it's tough for me to see. They've got so much learning to do.
Yeah. Well, the way I thought of it is what if an intern came up to me at my job and said they knew everything already and could do it better than I could do it, and I could just go home and they could just take over my cubicle, I would just laugh in their face.
Yeah, but to be fair, you're
comical, right?
Okay, but in this scenario,
you don't know anything.
But in this scenario, you're the Patrick Mahomes of what you do. You're not the Andy Dalton of what you do. If you're the Andy Dalton of what you do, then it's very possible that this intern Joe Burrow might already be better at your job than you are.
I don't think that's possible. Joe Burrow's going to go through a lot of growing pains.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I feel like the growing
I'm sure
pains
he will, but Andy Dalton is going through grown pains.
Growing pains.
He's already grown, and he's still going through pains.
Yeah.
He plays for a bad team, but Joe Burrow would be playing for a bad team too. I don't know. It's hard for me to see. I just feel like the NFL players, even the ones on the worst team, they have savvy and tricks of the trade and maturity that these kids just don't have yet. So I'm not sold. The talent and the potential is definitely there, but potential doesn't mean squat until you step on a field. So
I've got another example. So my last year at working at the DOT, we had our big office cookout thing. So like me and all the other people who were in their early 20s, we were playing ultimate frisbee against some people who seemed like they were in their 50s at the very least. And like we were lining up to start the game, and I'm thinking to myself, we're gonna smoke these people. These old people, they can't run. It's a lot of running playing ultimate frisbee. And my goodness gracious, we got our butts whooped so bad by these old people. They were just crisp and perfect like the San Antonio Spurs. And all the young guys were just running around looking like we ain't never played before. So, it's...
Had you played before, though?
Not really.
There you go. These college players have played. They've been playing for at least 3 years.
Oh man, but that does remind me. I'm not gonna use it as a point. But you can if you want. Like I played racquetball at Maryland's gym when it was open before the pandemic shut everything down, and I've played racquetball for a few years. So I'm definitely not a scrub at racquetball. And one time I was just playing by myself just to get some exercise. And this older guy who's a faculty member, he's got to be in his 60s, short guy. I'm definitely bigger, faster, and stronger than him. And he asked me if I want to play racquetball while he waits for his other buddies who were also a couple of older guys. And I was like, sure. And he whooped my ass so badly. Like he was hitting things, hitting clean shots close up against the wall. I was trying to hit these. I was hitting the ball really hard, putting it in the corner, and he was getting to it. And I'm like, he's like, he had perfect angles for everything. He had perfect shots for every situation. I'm just like, what the hell? I can't beat this guy. And I'm like, I could break this guy in half, and I could probably kill him in a dead sprint. But he just had the skills. Like he knew how to play the game better than I did.
Well, if we spent more time on this than I really thought that we would on the show, because we had already sort of beat this dead horse.
We spent 3 hours on it in Facebook chat yesterday.
Yeah. But if any of you have any thoughts and would like to support my stance or support Eric and Evan's stance, tweet at us at the Sportsballer or at Sportsballers18 on Twitter. Make sure you follow us on Facebook.com/thesportsballers. You can search for us, the Sportsballers, on YouTube to watch any videos that we've put up. So we put up the video from last week's draft special. We'll put this one up there. Obviously, if you're watching the video, that's how you saw it. And future video podcasts will go up there. You can also listen to the audio-only version on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. We'll send those links out as they show up on those sites. We host everything on SoundCloud, but when they show up on those other hosting sites, we'll post links to those on our Twitter page. Any shout-outs or anything from you guys before we wrap up here?
I mean, the Ravens drafted a couple of receivers I'm excited about, Devin Duvernay and James Prochet from Texas and SMU, respectively. Good hands and speed from these guys. So I think that's something the Ravens sort of overlooked in the past, was a receiver's ability to catch the ball. It's kind of important. Rashad Perriman comes to mind, for example.
I mean, who's going to throw them the ball? You don't have a quarterback. You just have another running back.
Oh, jeez. Corey, I was wondering what you were going to say about Thaddeus Moss. Didn't he sign with the Redskins?
Yeah, he signed as an undrafted free agent. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about him other than that he's Randy Moss's son. So, I mean, I'm excited from that aspect, but we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, one of these receivers, I did write in my notes that, let's see, James Prochet, he's less than 6 feet tall, but I wrote down Moss's people. Like he was just jumping and flying through the air because their quarterback was just throwing some fluttering, ducks and stuff, and he's flying through the air, diving and jumping over DBs and everything. So, we'll see.
Shout outs for you, Eric.
Sort of I don't want to say it's sarcastic because it's kind of true. Shout out to Draymond Green for giving us more smoke to talk about in this time of no sports, where he's just been running his mouth for like the last week and a half about anything and everything related to the Golden State Warriors, Kevin Durant himself, all this other crap. This is the same guy that had the audacity to say, I changed the game with the help of Stephen Curry. Like, it was the other way around.
It's like, no, Stephen Curry changed the game with a little bit of help from you.
Yeah, Draymond helped. Like, he was the help for sure in that scenario.
He was not the change.
Game changer, yeah.
I mean, I say I built my computer, but really my friend built the computer and I just sort of paid for it. I don't know how to put any of this stuff together. I still don't know. He did.
Yeah. So, shout out to Draymond and shout out to him for standing up for himself, though, from abuse from clowns that say, hey, you can't carry a team. Well, not everybody has to carry a team. Sometimes it's better to just be the guy that helps the team be great when they're already good, because that'll win you titles. Whereas the other way, then you're just end up being like the Sixers were before they decided to trust the process, and they'd win 40 games every year, never get a good draft pick, but never get out of the first round either. Do you really want that? Because that's what you get when you've got a guy that can make a bad team average, which Draymond can't. Draymond only makes bad teams bad because he can't elevate crappy players. He can only elevate good players sometimes.
That reminds me of when I was in 6th grade. I was on an undefeated intramural basketball team. And, if you've known me for, more than 10 minutes, you know I'm not a very good basketball player. But I was a role player on that team. And, I helped out and we dominated. It was amazing.
I played on 2 undefeated baseball teams in my life. That was a lot of fun. Winning all of the games is fun. It's pretty great. We rolled in Little League. Andrew was actually on the Little League team with me, where we won every game. We were just smoking fools. And then when I was 18, I was on another team. On my Greenbelt Babe Ruth team, we won every game. I think I started probably 5 out of those. We only played like 15 games, but I started like 5 of them, and I won every one of them. I was like, my ERA was like 0.5 or something great like that. I was like, this is fun.
Zach Britton out here just mowing people down, apparently.
Yeah, Zach Britton, except I went the distance every time. No playing around here. So
I was at a game, an Orioles game, when it was Zach Britton was starting for the Orioles against Michael Pineda of the Mariners. And both pitchers went 9 scoreless innings. It was incredible. The Orioles walked it off in the 12th.
See, unlike you guys, I can take responsibility and ownership for my undefeated regular season, my senior cross country.
Undefeated.
Did you elevate the team to a win?
No, I did not.
I
did. I elevated us to a win my freshman year.
But
Yes,
were you the
he
best
did.
runner?
He was.
I finished. Well, technically that year I finished second.
Oh,
Well then, yeah, okay. I'm not that impressed then.
I don't know.
I mean, it was also second overall. So.
Yeah. When Corey showed up to the cross country team, everything was different.
Oh.
This is serious business now.
Yeah, this is the real deal.
Apparently before it's just people running around.
Hey, I was the best player on that second undefeated team, so don't hate. I was very good on that team. The first team, I was among the best players. I won't say I was the best.
Oh,
My shout out will go to DM Stags TV. Take a look out for some videos coming next week. I mentioned before the draft, I interviewed some of our former DeMatha football players who were eligible for the draft. And next week, I'm going to be interviewing some DeMatha alums who are not sports related, who are actually helping with the fight against COVID-19 in various ways. So I'm looking forward to doing those interviews and being a part of that and branching that out. So take a look out for those on YouTube on DM Stags TV. I think that's about going to do it for us today as we are approaching the hour-and-a-half mark with nothing to talk about.
Well, it's 3 hours shorter than last week.
It is.
So.
So if you stuck around with us this long, be sure to hit the subscribe button on whichever medium you are using, whether it be iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or YouTube. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. You can also follow our individual Twitter accounts at Corey Puffett, at Quagmire6791, and at Evan_Ash13. So for Eric and for Evan, thank you all for joining us, and thank you for your support as always. I'm Corey Puffett, and we will see you next time on the Sports Ballers podcast.